Okay, you beautiful New Zealanders, in today's video, based on a speech by Riti, the co-leader of the Maori Party, I'm going to investigate what Waitangi and Chris Luxon have in common. But before we dive into this video, I need to explain some terminology that Waitangi uses in his speech. Otherwise, we're not going to understand what he's saying. Unless we become conversant with the meaning of certain words and phrases Waitangi uses, we won't have a clue what he is talking about, and most New Zealanders would not have a clue. So I hope you can get your head around this and really get to grips with it, because it's going to be helpful every time you hear an activist talk. First, the word kawanatanga. Article 1 of the treaty reads as follows: "The chiefs of the Confederation of United Tribes and the other chiefs who have not joined the Confederation cede to the Queen of England forever the entire sovereignty," that's kawanatanga, "of their country." The dictionary defines cede and sovereignty in this way. Cede means to give up or to give someone control. Sovereignty means government or complete power to govern a country. The British in 1840 meant exactly what the dictionary in 2024 says these words mean. Maori activists have manipulated the meaning of kawanatanga. They say it means much less than sovereignty. They say it means that the chiefs in 1840 gave the British the authority to rule over British settlers, but not to rule over Maori. Can you believe that? That's what they believe. They say that the British promised Maori the right to govern or to rule themselves separately. In other words, the British, they say, that's the activists say, established a dual government in New Zealand in 1840. Thus, Maori today do not recognise the present government as a government for Maori. It's only a government for non-Maori. That's what they believe. As a matter of interest, the Maori word for governor is kawana, hence kawanatanga is literally governorship or in English. Well, how do we know that the chiefs in 1840 understood the British meaning of these words at the time and not the Maori activist 2024 definition? First, by the way, there's plenty of evidence, but here's two. First, on the 5th of February 1840, the day before the treaty was signed at Waitangi, many chiefs made speeches in the big tent on the lawn at Waitangi, airing their views about the treaty, which had just been read to them in Maori and English. Thankfully, we have good records of these speeches. They all made speeches all afternoon on the 5th in that tent on a hot summer day at Waitangi. When one studies them, the speeches, it's obvious that the chiefs understood cede and sovereignty to mean what the dictionary today says they mean. The following is an example. This is Taraha of the Ngāti Rehia. He said this: "No governor for me, for us native men. We only are the chiefs, the rulers. We will not be ruled over." What? Thou a foreigner up and I down? Thou high and I, Taraha, the great chief of the Ngāpuhi tribes, low? No, never, never. It's so clear, isn't it? It's very clear. The chiefs knew very well what cede and sovereignty meant. If you read the rest of the speeches of the chiefs, many of them say pretty much the similar thing. There is a second reason we know that the chiefs knew the British meaning of these words. For example, Captain Hobson, the governor in charge of proceedings at Waitangi in 1840, had been told by his superiors in London, i.e. Lord Normanby, that if the chiefs did not cede sovereignty, the British were to pull out of New Zealand and leave Maori to it. It was either sovereignty or bust. That was it for the British. Here's a great supportive documentary evidence that the chiefs knew exactly what they were signing. They knew that they were ceding sovereignty. They knew what sovereignty meant, and they knew what cede meant. Henry Williams, there's the guy who actually translated the treaty from English to Maori on the night of the 4th of February 1840, he and his son Edward. And this is what he wrote. I mean, this is a first-hand witness, first-class witness to the whole treaty process, the guy who was more central to it than perhaps anybody else in the entire Treaty of Waitangi. And he said this: Henry Williams reported to Bishop Selwyn, quote, "The instruction of Captain Hobson was not to allow anyone to sign the treaty till he fully understood it, to which instruction I did most strictly attend. That the natives to whom I explained the treaty understood the nature of the same, there can be no doubt. And there's the reference. So the guy who was really in the middle of the entire process, the entire event, the most crucial guy in everything that was going on, his own testimony, his own story is that he was absolutely sure that the chiefs knew what they were doing and what they were signing. In fact, on the evening of the 5th of February, that's the night before the treaty was signed off by the chiefs on the 6th, he and his son spent the entire night with the chiefs up in Te Marae, explaining the treaty to them. So there's no doubt. And this guy was a CMS missionary. He'd been here since 1823, and he was head of all the missions in New Zealand. So he was no slug. And he had a reputation for being honest, for integrity, for being absolutely committed to the Maori people. He'd have no reason to lie. And this is what he wrote. Can't argue with that. The fact that the British carried on after 1840, technically they are still ruling today via our parliament, tells us that Maori in 1840 ceded sovereignty in the fullest sense of the word. These are just two reasons we know that the chiefs ceded sovereignty. There are other equally compelling reasons. Please read those reasons in the document that I've linked to in the description of this video. So when Rāwiri Waititi says things like, we are in the Kāwanatanga space, this is what he means. He means that Maori have the right to set up a dual government in New Zealand. Another phrase that Rāwiri uses a lot is rangatiratanga. He says, oh, we're in the rangatiratanga space. The word appears in Article 2 of the treaty. Quote, the Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and the tribes and to all the people of New Zealand the possession, that's tēnā rangatiratanga, of their lands, dwellings and all their property. Now Rāwiri just drops tēnā off because it means quintessential, and he just uses rangatiratanga, but this is what he means. For the British in 1840, the word possession meant just that, possession or ownership. Once again, activists have twisted the meaning of this word. For them in 2024, it means absolute authority or absolute sovereignty. In other words, the British in 1840, so the activists today say, promised Maori that they would retain their sovereignty over New Zealand. In this way, activists say wrongly that the treaty gives Maori today the right to have their own parliament and to be self-determining. Once again, they think the word rangatiratanga in the treaty guarantees them the right to set up a parallel government in New Zealand. Another phrase Waititi uses is tangata whenua, which just means Maori. The only other word we need to know the meaning of is Taonga. In Article 2, the British word for Taonga is property. Maori activists have given this word new meaning too. For them, it now means treasures, which is deliberately broad and vague. With treasures, activists can make the word mean anything they want it to mean. For the British in 1840, it simply meant property or chattels. We could rightly say that the British promised Maori the ownership of their land, dwellings and chattels, i.e. that is, the land on which their paths were situated and the surrounding land, the houses on those sites and the chattels on the pa. That was it. See how it's been stretched out of all proportion? Okay, I just want to draw your attention to something here because it's really important. Historian Bruce Moon says the word Taonga has an interesting history. In 1820, while assisting Kendall and Lee of Cambridge in compiling the first Maori dictionary, Hongi Hika had defined it as property procured by the spear teo. In an appeal for protection by 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs to King William in 1831, remember? These 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs wrote a letter to King William in 1831. They said, quote, these are the 13 chiefs, we are people without possessions. We have nothing but timber, flax, pork and potatoes. And their word for possessions was Taonga. In other words, it just means chattels. With treasures, it's come to mean things like the airwaves, minerals under the ground and on the ground, the water, the hydro, fisheries, forests, and language, even Antarctica. And there's the reference. So there's solid academic support for the truth that Taonga just means chattels. It does not mean treasures. What's incredibly interesting is that our Prime Minister has the same understanding of these words, Kāwanatanga, rangatiratanga and Taonga, as Rāwiri. Now this is where it gets really interesting. There's only one point of difference between our Prime Minister and Rāwiri Waititi. Luxon has not declared either his denial of or support for parallel government structures. The jury is out with Luxon on this point. If he denies that the treaty mandates parallel government in the treaty, the activists will crucify him. If he supports the notion of parallel government, the 81% non-Maori population will absolutely slay him. There's no way we'll stand for this. Keep an eye on Luxon's fingernails in the coming months. He can't ride two horses at once. Okay, what am I saying here? Well, I'm saying that in previous videos, I've shown that Chris Luxon, our Prime Minister, has activist understanding of those three key words: rangatiratanga, kauanatanga, and Taonga. He matches exactly Rawiri Waititi's understanding, an activist understanding of the meaning of those three words. Chris Luxon believes the treaty is a partnership, and if he does believe that, and he does, if he believes those three words and they match perfectly the activist understanding of those three words, and he believes the treaty is a partnership, and he does, then there is only one conclusion that Chris can come to if he's true to himself, and that is that the Treaty of Waitangi, 6th of February 1840, mandated a dual government. You cannot come to any other conclusion. So what Chris has done is he's painted himself into a corner. He must now, logically, go through and establish a dual government in New Zealand. He's in big trouble. Let's see what happens. Okay, so what you have here is you have the mind of an activist, an extreme activist, about to be put on display with what about he's about to say. So this is an absolutely incredibly interesting insight into the terribly mixed up mind of an activist.
This is where the future is. This is what this budget should be focused on.
So first thing, he's talking about the budget. This is on the same day that they had a big protest in Wellington with 10,000 people turn up, but he's back in the House and he's now criticising the budget. And of course, we know from my previous videos, Maori got 800 million, but Waititi says they got nothing.
And it does not. What this budget tells us is that Māori don't matter.
Okay, what the budget tells us is that Maori don't matter. So the first thing that comes out is the victim card, and we're used to that because somehow that's going to break down the population, make everybody feel sorry for Maori. And but the most tragic thing of this is that it gives all other Maori a victim mentality, and so they can't change their lives. They can't come off the bottom of the barrel because it's somebody else's fault. Until that thing or person or situation is removed, they can't change their life. So he's really messing up a lot of Maori who are listening to this, and the victim card always is hugely destructive on the subjects of the victim card, which is Maori.
That we signed the Tiriti o Waitangi, but we continuously allow this House to assume that it has sovereignty and absolute superiority over Māori.
Okay, so he's saying that this House, that's the government of New Zealand, just assumes that they have sovereignty over Maori, and the implication is that they did not cede sovereignty, and that's kauanatanga, remember? And so he comes out from his corner fighting, saying Maori did not cede sovereignty. Well, that's absolutely nonsense. That is up there with the Three Little Bears and Goldilocks, and it is completely untrue, and he's living in a parallel universe.
Article 1.
Here we go. This is Article 1 of the treaty. Let's see what he says.
Was the establishment of kauanatanga.
There we go. Sovereignty. And he's going to say, just before he says that, I'll tell you what he's going to say. He's going to say that the chiefs only gave the British permission to rule over unruly settlers, but not permission to rule over Maori. In other words, what he's saying is that in 1840, when Britain was the greatest superpower of the world and the Queen the most powerful lady in that superpower, that some Stone Age Maori chiefs were cutting a deal with the greatest power in the world, pushing her around, telling her what to do, that they only had authority to rule over the settlers and not Maori. Again, this is complete parallel universe stuff. It's fantasy.
Over your own people. Article 2 was the protection of the pre-existing rights of tangata whenua.
Okay, Article 2, he says, was the pre-existing rights of tangata whenua, that's Maori. So he's saying that the treaty in Article 2 promised Maori that they would be sovereign over New Zealand. Again, complete fantasy.
To their lands, to their homes, to their Taonga. Today, we made a declaration in the name of our mokopuna that we would no longer allow the assumption of this parliament to have superiority or sovereignty.
So he's saying today we made a declaration that this parliament is no longer sovereign over Maori. In other words, this is treason, this is rebellion, this is a breach of the treaty, because in the treaty they agreed to cede sovereignty to the Crown, and so he's now trashing all the 540 chiefs who signed the Treaty of Waitangi. He is dishonouring them. What's incredible to me is that Waititi doesn't seem to be aware at all of the Kohimarama Conference of 1860, and he's leading every other Maori in New Zealand to not be aware of this conference, but it was an incredibly important conference in the history of our country. 20 years after the treaty, this is 1860. Well, what happened? Kohimarama, by the way, is a suburb of Auckland. 112 chiefs met for a whole month. At the end of the conference, they moved and passed a series of resolutions. Now, these chiefs, many of them had been at Waitangi 20 years earlier. And let me tell you, if you've had 20 years to think about something, you usually get clarity about it. They were unanimous that they ceded sovereignty to the Queen at Waitangi in 1840. Now, here's an actual document that came from that conference, and it says, the proceedings of the Kohimarama Conference resolution adopted by the conference on the 10th of August 1860. So we had 112 chiefs having a big meeting for a month, and this is what they said. The chiefs having assembled at the conference hall, Paikea, that's a chief, rose and proposed the following resolution. Quote, this is the resolution, that this conference takes cognizance of the fact that the several chiefs, members thereof, are pledged to each other to do nothing inconsistent with their declared recognition of the Queen's sovereignty. Look how clear that is. And of the union of the two races. Also, to discontinuance of all proceedings tending to a breach of the covenant, that's the treaty, here solemnly entered into by them, seconded by that chief. Mr. McLean then said, let those chiefs of the conference who approve of this hold up their hands. Underlined, the resolution was carried unanimously. So let's just recap that resolution. 112 chiefs, without one exception, declared a recognition of the Queen's sovereignty, that they had actually ceded sovereignty at Waitangi 20 years earlier, and also a commitment to discontinuing any proceedings which would be a breach of the Treaty of the Covenant, solemnly entered into by them. So what is Waititi doing right now in Parliament? He is breaching that covenant. He is trashing the 112 chiefs who met in Kohimarama, saying they were talking crap and Waititi knows better. Well, so much for honouring your elders, Rawiri. So much for having respect for your tupuna. What a joke. Okay, what am I saying here? Well, I'm saying that in previous videos, I've shown that Chris Luxon, our Prime Minister, has activist understanding of those three key words: rangatiratanga, kawanatanga, and taonga. He matches exactly Rawiri Waititi's understanding, an activist understanding of the meaning of those three words. Chris Luxon believes the treaty is a partnership, and if he does believe that, and he does, if he believes those three words and they match perfectly the activist understanding of those three words, and he believes the treaty is a partnership, and he does, then there is only one conclusion that Chris can come to if he's true to himself, and that is that the Treaty of Waitangi, 6th of February 1840, mandated a dual government. You cannot come to any other conclusion. So what Chris has done is he's painted himself into a corner. He must now, logically, go through and establish a dual government in New Zealand. He's in big trouble. Let's see what happens. In my view, Chris Luxon, by funding Maori and promoting Maorification and co-governance, 800 million in the last budget, and it's set to continue and ramp up. This whole freight train that Chris is fueling is going to end in a train crash, an absolute wreck for this country. And Chris is the guy who's fueling the engine of that train. And that is a fact. Please share this video with everyone everywhere. The mainstream media should be reporting on the issues I am raising in these videos, but they're not. Why aren't they? Well, they're corrupt. Why are they corrupt? They are collaborating with Maori activists, there's no doubt about that. In the final analysis, the people of New Zealand, that's us, have ultimate power, not the politicians. Did you know that? The people can kick out the people in power and they can put them into power. How are we going to do that? Well, awareness is the key to change. If enough people in New Zealand become aware of the issues I am raising, we can save this beautiful country. So share these videos everywhere so that come the next election, we can vote the right people in and kick out the people who are destroying New Zealand.